Well, we're going to glue and clamp the dust seal onto the lid. And if you don't have 3 clamps to do this, it's very easy to just nail or screw the dust seal to the lid. But we have the clamps, so we're going to use them and show them how this works. Any carpenter's glue will do fine. So what I do is first glue up the dovetail on one corner, and then the next corner, and then we will put some glue around the edges of the lid and put this thing together. So that's glued. Come in. And you can see I have a 1/2 inch spacer below, and that is to keep the lid raised up so that the dust seal and the lid will be very close to in the same plane when I clamp things up, and I'll be able to shift them around a lot easier than if I had to move that dust seal the full 1/2 inch. Now, there's no problem gluing solid wood to plywood here. There isn't really any wood movement issue you need to be worried about because the plywood's not going to really move, and the solid wood is only going to move up and down, not in length. So we'll spread this out a little bit with the finger. That on there. Push it down, get it on the paper so I don't ruin this nice bench. And I'm going to wipe my fingers off a little bit. First thing to do is to clamp across the front. I just clamp it right behind the dovetail, give it a little pressure. Not too much because I want to be able to move things around. Okay, so before I really torque things down, I'm going to shift this edge of the dust seal flush with the top of the lid so that I have much less work to do when the glue is dry. So I'm going to just push it up here. There we go. And the closer it is, boy, you can save yourself an hour of just trying to flush everything up. And I got one corner here that does not want to flush up. So we'll loosen that guy a little bit. Well, that's starting to set up, so I think we're gonna call that one tight, done, and we'll have to flush up this corner much more than any other part. So that's, I would call, a partial victory. Not a total victory. So we'll clamp it up, secure it until the joints close, and clean this off with a rag. Things are looking pretty tight. So just like before, we're going to get the glue out of there so we don't have to clean it up later. So we've just got some beads here, and I'm sure I have some beads on the other side. And set this aside for 30 minutes and then come back and flush everything up with a block plane or whatever plane we have handy that's sharp. And then we can turn our attention back to the case and plugging up those screw holes so that the case looks nice, and we are getting really close to having the whole case finished. And after the case is finished, then we can turn our attention to the inside to the trays and tills. We are just about finished with the case. And so there are just a few cleanup chores we need to do to make it look more like a traditional chest instead of like a porcupine filled with drywall screws. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug a lot of these counterbore holes. And as you can see, I already started on the job here on the front. And one of the things I did that's not immediately obvious is I removed most of the screws throughout this. The screws, after they clamped this skirt on here, are so completely unnecessary, and so I drove them out. I can use them again if I want, but they don't need to be there. And it's also just best not to have them there, because what if you ever planed this and you run into a screw and you can ruin the plane iron or whatever tool you were using on here. So I've removed most of the screws. The ones I haven't removed are the ones you know, in the key joinery areas here at the corners on throughout the whole case. But these middle ones, I pulled them out. It'll make it easier for the plugs to go in, just you know, if the counterbores aren't quite deep enough. If you have a lot of plugs to put in, it's good to put a little puddle of glue in a plastic container or whatever you have sitting around, and then dip them in that. You know, some people give it a little swirly by getting the glue nozzle in there, and then they get a Q-tip in there, and it just gets, well, ridiculous. So I just dip them in like this, stick them in like that, and then I'll take a hammer and I'll knock that one home. And just continue on. And after they are all in, then I'll let the glue dry, and I will flush up these first with a flush cut saw, and then probably with a block plane to get them completely flush to the outside of the case. We are getting the lid ready to put it on the completed chest, and there's just lots of little details to clean up. One of the things is on the raised panel is to ease this corner pretty hard. I mean, it's okay if the plies come through because it's going to be painted, but you want it to be smooth. You don't want it to get caught on anything, and so I have this sanding block with some 120 grit. So that will take care of that. We'll also need to trim the rear end of these of the dust seal, and I'm just going to do that with any back saw. So any back saw will do. So I'm just going to trim it, and then I'll flush it up with a plane after I dress up these dust seals. Now, if you can remember back to where we were clamping this up, I had this come up proud a little bit, just a little bit, not much. And so the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this smoothed and leveled to the lid itself. Get the tool marks off too. So I'm going to do that, and after all these tool marks are gone and the seal is level to the lid, then we'll show it to the case and true up the lid to fit the case, put the hinges on, and then we can move to the inside. All right, moment of truth time. You know, will the lid fit, or will it bang against the case and bounce up and down? We're about to find out. Now, even if the lid doesn't fit, there are remedies that I'm going to discuss. You have lots of flexibility. So the first thing to do is to get the hinges secured enough. You don't have to put all the screws in. I'm just going to put, you know, one in each of these hinges, and then we can let it fall. And now the good thing is, before we let it fall, big finish, is we have lots of surfaces we can adjust to make sure the lid fits. If the lid is too tight, we can remove some of the this top skirt with a rabbiting plane. If it's too tight against the carcass, then we can get a rabbiting plane or a shoulder plane and remove some of the exterior edge of that. So that's another thing that we can change. You have to have a shoulder plane or a rabbet plane to do it, really. And then another option is if the lid doesn't close all the way, we can plane any of these edges all the way around here until things fit nice and tight. So not bad. So it falls nicely without too much trouble. Now what I do have here is I have there's a gap that's a little bigger here. It's tight up front, and a gap here. Now part of that gap, although back at the back, is probably from the hinges. I mean, the hinges are raised up a little more, so it's closed tight here and a little open there. Not too shabby, but if it were too shabby, like I said, it's really easy to adjust things by changing your top skirt or the actual carcass. So the next thing for me to do is to install the rest of the screws, and then with the case together, all together like this, I'm going to take a block plane or a smoothing plane or whatever sharp plane I have and just plane the dust seal so that it is flush to this top skirt. And so that it's all one, looks like it's all one piece. And you know, there's almost no way to get it perfect before assembly, but you know, these long edges are pretty good, or these short edges are pretty good. It's the long edge that is going to require a lot of work. So this is pretty far out. It's about you know, a 1/16, a little bit more than a 1/16. And so I'm going to have to plane those down. I'm not going to take the lid off again. You know, once I put the screws in, I'm going to plane it in place so that I know when I'm done. So I'm not taking the lid off, putting the lid back on, taking the lid off. So I've got some screws to put on, and then we're going to cut out the pieces for the tills and put them together, and they're so easy that you're really on the downhill slide to being done here.